everybody. I'm here today with Leah Boden, Modern Miss Mason, and we're going to be talking about her book that she's just released that I've been lucky enough to read.
Good timing.
And and we're also going to just be talking about some other things associated with homeschooling Charlotte Mason in a modern way. So, Leah, do you want to just start by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm Leah. I live right in the middle of England, born and raised here. And I am married to Dave. We have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. My oldest is 20, my youngest is 12. So kind of been home educating for most of that time as well. And my husband and I both have a background in youth children's work education, so always been very passionate about the next generation, as it were, whether it be youth work via church or local council stuff. And in our kind of raising children years, we very much, our focus has been on education. And and very early on in my research of I remember Googling, is homeschooling legal in the UK? do homeschool children go to university? All those kind of normal questions when you first start. And I remember meeting and coming across the work of Charlotte Mason very, very early on in my research. And one was kind of pleased to find a voice from the UK that was interesting and caught my attention. And I honestly haven't looked back since. That kind of caught my attention very early on, and that's been my practice and my work since then.
And what made you decide to write this book, Modern Miss Mason?
So I guess being a practitioner of her ideas and methods, as well as a student of her work, has enabled me to grow in understanding and in the practice. And probably about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years into my own journey, I just started to share on a live video platform called Periscope. I don't know if you remember that. I think it's long gone now. Yeah, I remember my kids would be napping or having rest time, quiet time in the afternoon, and I'd jump on Periscope a couple of times a week and just kind of share our journey a little bit, and kind of began to gather a crowd around this idea of finding our freedom within the philosophy. And I guess many of us coming into this in the early 2000s were met with quite a prescriptive model of the Charlotte Mason philosophy, and not, wasn't particularly a bad thing. It was maybe just not something that we were going to continue into the future. And so, you learn from these things, and then you kind of, we're progressive in our thinking and our action, and we say, how does this look for my family, my culture, my 21st century expression of this? So that's what I started to do, and started to gather those groups. Maybe on Facebook started to happen. Then I started to speak at conferences a little bit, where I met people in the UK, and these things just gently grow. It's very organic, really. So after many, many years of doing that and writing for magazine articles, teaching, doing workshops, I was just met with the opportunity of chatting to an agent and pulling together a book proposal. And I thought, okay, I'm in my late 40s, maybe it's time. Maybe I feel confident enough to say, okay, I've been doing this for, however many years. Here's what I would share. And I wasn't in a rush. It wasn't like it was this big life goal to publish a book. But if I could do something that had more of a wider impact, that would help people find their freedom within the philosophy, then I was all in. I'm like, okay, well, let's do this. So, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to traditionally publish, because you get brilliant editorial team, which I needed because I've got all these passionate ideas and these analogies and these ways of explaining it, and they come alongside and say, okay, let's help you shape that. And so that was fantastic. So and then there we have it. Modern Miss Mason was birthed, as it were. And I'm so grateful that we get to spread the word through the written word.
So you're based in the UK, but most of the homeschoolers who talk about Charlotte Mason are from America.
Yeah.
How do you think writing your book as a British person, having access to her archives, 2 hours away from where you live, helped you write the book?
Yeah, I mean, most of the archives are online at Redeemer University. So people do access them. I mean, there are loads of platforms that will find the archives and do things with them. But yes, I do get to drive up north and sit in the Army, as you've been there, you visited there. I think the UK community were definitely ready for a British voice to bring her words back into the forefront of our minds. I mean, obviously it's published by an American publisher, so it had to kind of be able to cater to the wider audience, the language and the kind of stories I used. But I feel really privileged. Like felt like I don't know, it felt I had to be really careful with it, like it was this. I didn't want to speak for her because I'm pointing because we're on video here, but my 6 little volumes, in fact, there's
Yeah, yeah.
5 there, there's one here.
Mm-hmm.
Those pink books behind me, she speaks for herself. I don't need to justify her work. I don't need to speak on her behalf. But what I felt I was kind of commissioned to do, as it were, was to bring her ideas into the 21st century and help create a language that we can use every day, and an understanding that wasn't archaic and we weren't stumbling over vocabulary, that actually we started our own language that still was honoring the principles. So as somebody who really treasures and honors the fact that she was a British educator and loves that part of her story. So yeah, I did feel really privileged to be able to do it. And also, you know what, the audiobook went down very well because I got to read it myself. And so having a whole book read about Charlotte Mason with a British accent has been highly popular in the States, as you can imagine.
Yes.
So yeah, it's amazing, really. And there are so many wonderful books that have been written to help us understand her philosophy, and I have probably most of them, and they've really played a part in my journey and probably helped, really have helped shape what came out as this. And what these things are like, Michelle, you can read a whole book or a massive kind of PhD thesis, and then you take one line, add it to a talk or a workshop or a book or something. But
I got more than that out of it.
Yeah,
more than one line.
Yeah, but what I mean is, you might get, the impact is great and the learning is amazing, but actually it's one line that you add to your work that helps shape what you want to say. But it doesn't denote the fact that you need to study and you need to read widely and you need to fill yourself. So that's what I've spent many years doing, and I'm grateful for all those fantastic books. But yeah, we do have one now written by a Brit.
Yeah, I definitely I've stopped homeschooling now, but I still found that there was things in there that just helped me think about other things with Charlotte Mason as well, leaving a legacy and the importance of community and things like that. But we'll get to that later. Let's just talk about a few other things before we get to that. So what I thought what we could do is just talk about some of the things that when you apply the Charlotte Mason in a modern context, how you might look at things a bit differently to maybe how Charlotte Mason prescriptively did it. So one of the things I thought we might talk about is the book lists. I know a lot of people focus on, Charlotte's books, and Charlotte Mason was very strict about keeping to the sort of book lists that she had. She really carefully considered them. But today, those book lists are over 100 years old, and there's a lot more books that have been written since then, and there's new information. What are your sort of thoughts on preparing a book list as a modern Charlotte Mason educator.
Yeah. So Charlotte Mason obviously pioneered alongside other people the PNEU, the Parents National Educational Union, which then was, they had the Parents Review, which was a magazine that went out to people eventually all over the world, who even missionaries who had governesses and teaching. And so because of that, because she'd set up an organization, she'd set up a form of structure, then obviously that people want, and it wasn't all parents, it was teachers and governesses. So they wanted lists. They wanted to know, just tell me what to do. And so the rich work that went on to choose each book, absolutely, it was the right thing. And she carefully considered and also took them out. If they didn't work, she got feedback and she took them out and put them back in. Now, they were relevant for that time, like you said. They were appropriate for that time. Well, whether we think they're appropriate or not, but they were right for that time to teach that particular subject. And I think what we have to do, I'm interested in her choices. I'm interested in these kind of older works. I think they are really interesting and we've got a lot to learn from them. But my question is, why? Why is this book important? What is the nugget of truth in here? What are the principles held by the author in the content? And how do I look for that in a more modern book? How do I look for that in a modern author? So, yeah, I've used some of the older books. To tell you the truth, Michelle, when I've tried to use some of those older ones, my kids have lost interest. I've got bored. I've stumbled over vocabulary or words. It's not been the easiest thing. Very early on, I had to tell myself, I can create my own curriculum. I can do this myself. I can take the principles of what these books are about. And she said to us, I think it's in volume 3, that, learn to discern what a living book is. Find out for yourself. I'm not going to tell you. So we take these ideas. So almost these lists that we come up with, I've got it in my book, this is what I believe a living book is. She didn't tell me that. I took it from her books, from the things that she said. She gives us instruction on how to look for them and what they look like. So I think if you're going to come up with your own list, which I know you've done so well, you have to look at what's culturally appropriate, what will teach our children about this current age, this 21st century life, as well as history. We're looking at language and we're looking at context. We're looking at socially, what is appropriate for the language and stories and the examples that we want our children to hear about and learn about today. We're looking at, even from within each family, what your family values are. You'll read some stuff that just does not align with what you want to teach your children. Whether you're a person of faith or not, you still might come across things that this is difficult. And I don't want to bring this to the table right now or ever. So I think you have to be discerning, don't you?
Yeah, I think one thing that people might say who disagree with that, they still want to stick to one of the books on the 100-year-old list. They might say, well, in those times people loved God more, or they were more Christian, and so they had more of a Christian emphasis, whereas a lot of the books that are published today are secular and have sort of tried to write God out of the story. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see that point of view. I can't, so I can see it. What I would say is our job as parents, I believe, is to be the primary disciplers and educators of our children. So I'm not reliant on a history book or a geography book with Christian morals and values to teach them that. That's part of the wider value and the atmosphere of our home. So I get to read scripture, pray with my kids, teach them, about theology, whatever. And then I get to choose books that aren't necessarily written by people of faith, aren't necessarily Christian books. Well, we do read those, but I'm not afraid of adding those in, because the foundation and the atmosphere of our home is a place of faith, is a place of prayer, is a place. So that is how I've approached that. I think there's a lot of fear that can be around this idea of, well, if I don't use that book, then my kid's not going to learn this bit. And I think we have to let go of that. Fear is never a good foundation for a family, for mothering, for homeschooling. And when we start asking, there's those questions of, oh, am I doing the right books? And what if I'm not doing enough? And what if they're getting behind? Those fear questions, I get them, I understand them. But we have to switch that up, really. And that is a lot to do with us, isn't it? Like, how are we growing, how are we mature in our leading of this? So I hear that. It's absolutely not how I've ever felt about these books. And you can see, Michelle, from this is my particularly lovely vintage self, I love looking at them and collecting them and reading them. And there are times when I think I'm going to add this to what we're doing with the children, but I'm always looking for new authors, or even authors that I haven't heard about yet, that tell a beautiful story that will add to our learning. So I just think we have to be, we can't be so narrow-minded about it. I don't think that's helpful. I think that just creates stumbling blocks, really. And I always want to remove those barriers and help create connections as wide as possible.
I think one of the criticisms that we sometimes hear about Charlotte Mason book lists is that there's a lack of diversity in the books. And I think that if we are aware of that, then we can seek out books that do teach in other areas. I think because as Australians, we didn't have book lists, because they were very American. We had to do that. We had to look for authors that talked about Indigenous Australians and things like that. So we have added that in, but I know it can be hard because a mother finds it hard to read all the books before her child. So recommendations are what you sort of want. Do you actually recommend any books in Modern Miss Mason? Do you have any book lists or anything like that?
I make mention of a couple throughout illustrations, but I don't have a book list in there, no. And on my UK Facebook page, which is where we've got over 2,000 families who are practitioners of the Charlotte Mason philosophy in their home, we have a separate kind of page that we gather British resources and book things. So I rather than me kind of saying this is what I recommend, we've done it in community. And hopefully once that has been, we've been doing that very slowly. In fact, I only think we've been doing that for 7 or 8 years. I don't think it's even been a decade. So I will hopefully try and refine that and pop it on a website somewhere and just saying these are recommended by the UK community.
Yes,
I think it can be helpful. People have to read them. They have to read them. They have to work them through in a term with their children. And what we want is, real tried and tested things. Because I don't know if you may have done this, but I've read books off lists before that have been considered living and just don't like them, or they haven't been engaging. My kids haven't been able to narrate from them. And so, I just think,
well, that definitely happened in Australia. There's some people who recommend, certain books, and there was one book, John of the Cirrus, and it was about a boy sort of coming to Australia in the First Fleet, and it was kind of an Enid Blyton style book of a voyage, and it was a nice book, but it was $157 secondhand. Wow. And luckily Anthony of Living Books Press reprinted it, and it's now only $16. So it's worth a read for $16, but it's not worth $157. And I think sometimes we get this anxiety that we're not getting that particular book that someone recommended.
I know.
And you have to get over that, because there's more books than you can. When I finished homeschooling, that I hadn't read 20 to 30% of the books that we had bought to homeschool, because I was just over optimistic about how much we could get through in a year.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. And yeah, I've just noticed today actually that Anthony's he's brought out a British geography series book that I've not seen him done before. So I ordered that this morning, but it is helpful because and that particular one that I noticed today has been updated to for 21st century context, because things have changed a lot. So yeah, I think that it's good to be curious about them and have a look, if you can have a look and can access the books. Some are available for free on Kindle because they're so old, or Amazon Online have them and things like that. But I think for me, it is more than just trying to add them into what you do with your children. It is asking the question, why was this important? And what are the values from this that I can write down and find in other books? So yeah, we could try that.
All right. One of the other things that I think we could talk about with moderning up our Charlotte Mason is the approach that she had. Obviously, Charlotte Mason was a school teacher and it was written for governesses, and, some parents were doing it as well. But now, and she had the very, the forms, you're in this form or that
That's
form
right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of homeschoolers like to combine grades and do it a bit differently. How do you think her approach is different to the way you do it, is different to the way it was sort of set up when she was doing it?
Yeah, I mean, again, for me, I look at how she did it as an organizational need. So if you are providing a curriculum for a mass crowd, a mass audience, if you are providing book lists, then you're doing this for teachers and governesses with some parents in there as well, then there has to be a system, there has to be organization, just like with what you do in Australia. There has to be a pattern and a method to it. And so I get it, that these are the forms. And the form system was very wide, wasn't it? Like a lot of age groups were within one form. So I actually do think there was a lot of scope for movability and freedom within that as well. So, but I'd see that. But what I see that as was a necessity for a system. And I am home educating in the 21st century for a very different reason, a very different, it's not, I haven't got a governess and a nursery. It's just me and my children. And so I'm very much about learning together at the children's stage rather than their age. And so because we get the freedom to do that, and here in the UK there aren't any regulations currently, so we do get a lot of freedom, and we've discussed this before, Michelle, on my podcast, but we do get that freedom. So I have a structure, I have a format, but there's a lot of freedom within that. And so I had children read really early, and then I had some who just took ages, and I was getting concerned about that, and like, what am I doing wrong? But they were just taking their time. And if I was so stressed about they should know this by this stage, I wouldn't have been particularly peaceful and pleasant for the rest of my children. So I think I've tried to just hold that all very lightly. I do research, what kind of the books that maybe are right for the age of my children and whatever the stage they were at. But we usually went with, or still do, what we're loving, what we're enjoying, what brings delight, and what helps us grow and takes us on to another level of learning. And that doesn't come overnight. I get that. I mean, that's taken, that's from years and years of my work and my experience. And this is why I think that all the kind of plans and programs and, Charlotte Mason inspired curriculums and all those kind of different phrases are helpful starting places. I mean, starting places or a continued place.
Well, I think in your book you've got, take a Mason moment.
Yes,
and
that's right.
that is very much about, applying her approach. They're all very
That's
practical
right. Yep.
applications after each chapter,
Yep.
which you know, they mightn't be able to do them all, but it certainly gives them ideas for how you do
Yeah,
implement her approach in a modern setting. I think they're quite helpful.
yeah, definitely.
One of the I recently attended a conference in Australia, and there was 29 speakers. It was an online conference, and there was a whole range of home educators with different styles speaking. And one of the things that they a lot of the unschoolers talked about was this sort of kids finding their passion.
Hmm.
And to me, I thought, well, you can still find your passion in the Charlotte Mason method. How do you think? Um, do you think there's enough scope for creativity in the curriculum and for kids to find their passion, you know, within the method?
Yeah, I mean the whole point of the methods and the philosophy is to enable children to think for themselves, to have their own thoughts and to make their own connections, and to leave room for them to gain knowledge for themselves. So it, Charlotte Mason spent a lot of time talking to parents about getting out of the way, and leaving them, let them be, she kept saying, didn't she? This idea of masterly inactivity. And I really believe that in that space, in that leaving them to dig for knowledge, again, not using all this terminology within the philosophy, but that actually you can come up with your own passions and your own connections and your own thoughts. Now, I guess the difference with a Charlotte Mason philosophy is that you are opening a door. We'll use all different analogies here. You're opening a door to the world to them. You're laying a feast. So the philosophy and the methods really do leave room for children to have their own thoughts and ideas, their own creativity. And Charlotte Mason emphasized so much about us leaving room for that and getting out of the way. And the difference is, I guess, with the unschooling approach is that, so that I have quite a few friends who would describe their approach as more unschooling. There would be a child-led, delight-led, passion-led. So whatever the child is veering towards, then you facilitate that and resource that. And I guess the difference with the Charlotte Mason philosophy is that we are laying a feast, as Charlotte Mason talked about. So you are intentionally directing them to certain places. But those places are wide and spacious, whether it's a book, all living resources. The whole point of a living education is that it's wide and spacious. The whole emphasis on being outdoors. And I really believe that even within that format, as it were, there's a lot of scope for passion and interest. And also Charlotte Mason was really big on leaving the afternoons free for interest, for handicrafts, for nature walks, for creativity. And so you're not like packing the day with lessons. There is this, because the lessons are shorter, you're spending the mornings really intentionally, and then you've got these afternoons for delight and enjoyment. So yeah, I mean, children are children, and I think that the Charlotte Mason philosophy does allow them to be children and yet to engage with them with the brilliant ideas that they naturally have.
Yeah. Mm. So, what do you think about the idea of Charlotte Mason preparing your children for university? Do you think that her method, I mean, it stopped at about 16, and it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like when I was reading one of her books that the boys probably left at 14, even
Yeah.
some of them. So her curriculum was really only going up to 14, maybe 16. What do you think about university preparation and the Charlotte Mason method?
Yeah. I mean, I think the plans and programs probably went up to 15, 16, but I think the principles and the methods can go on for life. I mean, I use her principles with my own learning journey. So I will read and then write a narration into a book to help me remember it, to help me learn. So I think you are setting up your children for a lifetime of learning and the ability to pay attention, to be an observer of the world, and to connect with whatever opportunity comes your way. So I think that is all those skills are amazing for ongoing and further and higher education. I think what we have to be aware of is what is required in the country that we live in, what steps they need to take towards a higher and a further education, and what skills they particularly need to do that. So here in the UK, between 14 and 16, kids do GCSEs. And then between 16 and 18, they may have an apprenticeship, they may do A-levels, they may do a BTEC, all these acronyms. I know acronyms. They're just basically different ways of getting the next step to higher education. Yeah. And some of the feedback, like my eldest daughter, when she first went to do into sixth form, she was doing her national exams, and the only feedback she had for me, and this is my first child, obviously the guinea pig, she just said, I wish we'd done a little bit more essay practice, like the actual what is expected in an essay at school. And I guess we'd done written narrations and compositions, but I probably hadn't done this is how an examiner looks at an essay. So she had to learn that, and she did fine, and she had the ability to learn quickly. But so I took that feedback, and I'm like, okay, like there are some things that I can upskill my children in before to give them the right options to do these exams and to move on. So yeah, I think the ability to learn is amazing if you can actually set your children up for life. And some of the stuff is just the ability to make connections and write those into an essay, a thesis, whatever. But I think we do need to consider, I don't think we can be ignorant of the systems of our country and what's required, and to actually prepare our children for that and not cause them to fail or fall or feel embarrassed.
Yeah. I know we talked in your podcast about cramming for exams, how one of my sons said, oh Mum, I wish you'd taught me how to cram for exams. And you said your son had a similar experience.
Yeah, that's right. That was the other thing, I think. And when my current son, who's doing GCSEs, he's doing national exams, the other thing that I do is if I need to bring in a tutor or it's generally like a granddad or something in our family who is so we just brought in my dad. He did computer science with my son and helped him with some study skills, and helped him with that cramming, because I just hadn't taught him that. So and unfortunately that is kind of what they need, isn't it? They need, and it's so countercultural to what we've brought them up in, and this not testing them. I know we do narrations, but this idea of ongoing learning and refreshing and reviewing, and then suddenly they're in this world where they're like, right, you've got to learn all this to pass this exam, so how are you going to do it? So I'm learning a lot along I'm still figuring it all out, really. But I think I have got better over the years with each child.
So one of the things I liked when reading your book was that you sort of took Charlotte Mason's ideas and then you used modern psychology authors to demonstrate how these principles still work today. So you talked about Atomic Habits, and that's a great book. And another one that you were talking about was, I put here, it was on page 54, John Medina, Too Much Information Without Connecting the Dots. And and that was like, even though we just talked about teaching our kids to cram, that is what happens in a lot of schools. Is this in the test? But there's a longer journey that you have with Charlotte Mason, and it mightn't necessarily show up in testing, but with the Charlotte Mason method, there's still a lot that supports her ideas that's coming out in modern.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm amazed how often I will hear in kind of modern psychology and sociology the concept of narration. I remember there's this one guy I follow on Instagram, I can't remember his name right now, but he did a whole kind of carousel post of reading about basically the best way to learn anything is to get up and teach it to somebody as soon as you've read it. And I was listening to a podcast recently, and at the end of the podcast, he said, if something was interesting to you today, as soon as you finish this, go and tell 3 people what that was. And they're all, so people know, like, the best way to embed learning and to make learning stick is to be able to communicate that in some way pretty quickly after you've heard it. And I love that excites me that people are talking about that today. And it also makes me think Charlotte Mason was amazing. The fact that she knew this was key and was communicating this and practicing this, and it's not difficult. It's really simple, but we just have to create the habit of doing it and realize the power of it. And so people are generally talking about these things in the adult world, whereas obviously as practitioners, we are engaging in these things and creating habits for our children. So the difference with kids is that, and I'll hear from mums all the time, they'll say, they'll read a text to their child and then say, ask the child to tell them back. And they kind of go, why would I have to say it all again to you? And why would I have to tell you back when you just read it? And I think that's sometimes the case, is that children need to understand the power of narration and what's going on in the brain, and also create a habit of it and just keep doing it. But yeah, I love that. And I see this, there are other examples that are not coming to mind right away, but where these especially principles like paying attention, just the habit of attention in our scattered 21st century society, where young people are watching 3-second videos, and sometimes they're too long and they get bored. So this, our attention
and multitasking,
but the media and consumerism, everything at the moment is built upon short attention, like the ability to be able to, let me tell you something really quick and repeatedly, and then you might buy it. Whereas what deep work requires and deep connection requires is attention. Doesn't have to be for a long, long time, but can I look at this flower? Can I read this poem? Can I look at this piece of art? Can I listen to this music? Can I engage with this story enough for it to make a difference to me? And that's what we're teaching our children more and more. Yeah.
I think we've sort of talked about the first 2 parts of your book, which is reframing childhood and reframing education. One thing before we go on to the last part I thought we should mention is that, your book is really good for the new homeschool mum who doesn't really understand how to teach. And so this really helps them to start to get the picture of how to teach Charlotte Mason, because I'd been homeschooling for a couple of years before I sort of understood how Charlotte Mason taught, but it was like a teacher's college for me.
Yes.
And I know that Charlotte Mason's course that her governesses did, that was just a 1-year course where they would learn the Charlotte Mason method and then they'd go off and teach it. But I think it's so important for a homeschool mum not just to get the resources, which is what you're often obsessed with, is what will I use to teach
what
this
do
or
I
that?
buy?
Yeah but to actually spend the time knowing how to teach, because that once you get that, it makes it so much easier to get all your resources.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's just talk about the last part of your book, which is reframing motherhood.
Mm,
And I thought I'd just let you explain a few of the ideas that you've got in there. And one of them is creating soul space.
mm.
So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, the reframing motherhood part was important to me to add to the conversation of this whole story, this whole book. Charlotte Mason wasn't a mother, so it kind of seems a little bit ironic, but she was surrounded herself, her community and company, and were lots of incredible women who were mothers and business people and of all different walks of life, really. So she observed motherhood from teaching, from being engaged with the PNEU and all that kind of stuff. So what she speaks about in her writing are really from observations. And she says this simple, I mean, well-known phrase, if mothers could only do for their children what they do for themselves, when these are all done, we would have happier households. And that's often quoted for mothers to kind of like, I need to get out as well. I need to relax. But for me, this is very much this idea of a continual paying attention to our own inner life and outer life. But that whole soul space thing was, how do I responsibly look after and lead myself, so that not only just so that I can give out to my children, but that so I can be the person that I'm supposed to be, so that I can be a whole person and honored that way as well. So I talk about this kind of, rather than this exhaustive getting to the end of yourself and then needing a spa weekend or something, or crashing in bed for a week, that, and sometimes that is required, but that actually we can create a life, create a rhythm, simple rhythms, where there is a continual, like a drip, 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 or a continual feeding or a continual watering of very simple things. So I go through, I think it's the play chapter, but I go through her examples of such simple things that we can do, most of them completely free as well. So get out in nature on our own. She even talks about having a nap without the children, which I thought was quite observant. And reading a book. She talks about looking at art, going to a gallery, and these things are so accessible and so simple. And I know from experience and from doing these things that they really do play this part of refueling and energizing. So I'm sat in my office now, and I've got next to me just little art prints that are all over, so that I've always got an accessibility to looking at beauty and looking at art. And make sure that in the rhythm of our day, even within my homeschooling, that we'll have a kind of a sit down timed 10 minutes where we just pick up a book and read together, which makes me do it as well, quietly, with some music on in the background. So there's these simple rhythms that actually can add to a continual fueling, rather than we do everything and just wear ourselves out and we get to that point of exhaustion. And I just, I've done that, I've done the other thing, and I wanted to find a better way. And so I just started to take some of these ideas and add them into my very normal everyday life. So sometimes I think I put it in the Mason moments. Stick a poetry book in the bathroom if you want, or put some art prints above the boiler in the kitchen, like I've done that. So when I'm doing dishes, I'm looking at Monet and Van Gogh, and they're there. And you can add beauty into the very normal of our everyday lives. So that's probably talking about crossing over two different chapters there, but there is this idea of continually refueling and refreshing and learning for ourselves as well.
And so I suppose that's the sort of chapter about becoming
Yes.
intellectually alive.
I know it's hard
And
to say.
yeah, I know for myself that I was much more interesting at the dinner parties because of all the books that I was
Yes,
reading.
me too.
And I think that, I mean, you just because you can pick some of the books, especially in the high school years. I remember reading Frankenstein and thinking, wow, I never knew this book was like this, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
because
I
you
know.
sort of think of it as something different. And so,
Well, as a movie, I used to just think
yeah,
it's, yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
so I know that a lot of the books that we read in those last years were ones that I wanted to read as much
Mm,
as the kids wanted to read, and we got
absolutely.
a lot
Yeah.
out of them. And I have
Yeah.
noticed since I've stopped homeschooling that I read less.
Do you?
I do
Yeah,
well because I read a lot of things associated, more business related things
of
rather than
course.
just
Yeah, yeah.
enjoying the beauty of education. And it's such a short period for your kids to really be able to spend
Sorry.
that time doing it. I remember reading in one of Charlotte's books that she said, you know, I really hope that when they finish that they're not just going to go to the movies all the time, they're going
Yes.
to enjoy, you know,
Yeah.
or just read the paper. They're going to still continue to enjoy reading and things. And I still have books going. And if I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was reading a bit of Jane Austen the other night, just to
Oh,
keep, you know, a challenge of staying intellectually alive. But I think to some extent it is easier when you're homeschooling and you are immersed in it
yeah.
because you're giving that
Yeah,
example to the
absolutely.
kids.
I think it's easier probably, yeah, when you are homeschooling, but also when you are like for me, because I have a community that I'm teaching and I do a book club. That's a good excuse if you do a
Mm.
book club, Michelle. Keeps you reading. There is this, yeah, and the whole essence of that phrase comes from Charlotte Mason had a friend and colleague called Matthew Arnold. Is it Matthew Arnold in that instance? I think it is, who was a school inspector, also a critic on society, he was a poet and a writer. And he talked about continually keeping his teachers fresh in their training and making sure, and like nowadays that's normal, that second nature is the continual assessment and kind of sending staff off for courses. And but back then he was quite unique, I believe, that he wanted to make sure they were continually trained and making sure they were fresh
Mm.
in their vocation. And so Charlotte Mason uses that phrase, like, of course, it's almost like a total assumption. Of course, as the parent teacher, you will stay intellectually alive. Otherwise, how are you going to help and deliver this thing we call education? And so I kind of liked that, oh, she's expecting me to continue to read for myself. And again, like I say in the book, that doesn't mean you go back to university, you go and do PhD, you know, anyone can grow. And if the sole end of education is growth, then, you know, growth looks different to a tree than it does to a sunflower or whatever, or wildflower. We can all grow at different paces and in different ways with different food. And I think the question is, am I growing? Am I adding to my growth? And so for some people, it's just kind of getting your head around poetry and reading a little bit of that. For others, it is getting back into the habit of reading. And for some, it might be, you know, get yourself on a training course, do some, for other people, it might be just signing up for some workshops, going to a conference, all those kind of things, I think add to our continual growth and learning.
Something for yourself as well. I think it helps
Absolutely.
if everything's about the kids
Yes.
and, you know, reading about stuff for them, then you will burn out because
Yeah,
you'll
you
feel
will.
like you don't have your own space.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's true.
the other part that you talked about is the importance of building community and kinship. I know, you know, in a school environment, it's already there. And we often hear people say stuff like, what about socialization? Do you think Charlotte Mason talked a lot about community? Do you think that was important to her?
I think it just existed. I mean, again, she taught teachers and governesses and then had this correspondence program for parents. So the community was there. It was there, whether it was distant.
I mean, even the PNEU was a community,
Even the
really,
PNU,
wasn't it?
that's
Yes.
right. The parents' review, the kind of post bag they had, and the letters to and forth. And if you read those, they're amazing and really get this sense of camaraderie. And also, you read some of the questions, and they're the same questions that parents are asking today. You know, the things that we are navigating and mulling over. So yeah, I think that in that day and age, yeah, community was there, and obviously there were schools, you know, PNEU schools, and there were celebrations in the summer, and they would have things where they do plays together and readings. So I think that was this acknowledgement of children being together, families being together. Some of what I talk about is this idea of growing in community and learning in community alongside other women, and I think that, or other parents, and I think that often that nowadays, you know, in 2023, that looks very much like Facebook groups or websites that we might comment on, or going to workshops or conferences.
I
And
should
then
stop you there just to say that you have got a conference coming up as well, haven't you?
yes, I have. Yeah, so we do the Modern Miss Mason conference on the 1st of July. It is physically here in Warwickshire in the UK, but we do have a online ticket as well, so you can stream the conference or you can watch it later, because if you're in Australia it would be slightly hard for you to
Well, in Australia we've got one coming up just a few weeks before, on June the 10th,
oh,
and
fantastic.
we're having ours in a convent in North Sydney. Mary McKillop is she started the sort of the Catholic education system in Australia, and there's a museum there and a convent with all the sisters and St Joseph's, or I think it is.
Wow,
And so we're
amazing.
having it in her old convent next to her museum, so that'll be fun.
That's really
But
fun.
I think I was talking to a girl that I know, and she was saying that she now has this great community, and I said, "Oh, how did you meet them?" And she said, "Oh, it was at your conference. You know, 2 years
Oh,
ago, we all sat at the
that's
same
great.
table,
Yep,
and
yep.
and so I think actually trying to hang out with real life homeschoolers, because since COVID, so much is done online, and you know, I would get to meet you if I didn't have
Yeah,
online. But
that's
I
right.
think it is very important to actually mix with real life
Yes,
homeschoolers.
it is. And if you can find, and that often the gateway is, you know, look on Facebook, type in your local area, put the word homeschooling or home education, and you generally find somebody somewhere.
Yeah.
And then, and what we found in the early years is that we did go to a lot of groups, we did go to bigger things and organized things, and then we found our own crowd, we found the
Yeah.
people that our kids got on with, we found our friendships, and they've kind of got smaller, the group has got smaller, as it were, but we are, you know, so I've got one home educating friend family who live across the park from me, and their kids just walk over and hang out with my teenage kids. So you know, it's kind of become that, but in those early days you kind of figure all that out, don't you? Find who you connect with, who you click with. And I love hearing about nature groups being started and book clubs being started and all these wonderful things happening. Yeah, it's
And if you
great.
don't have one, try to start one yourself. That's what
Yeah.
I did, you know, because there wasn't necessarily, you know, no one was running an art
Yes.
classes. So we
No, that
started art classes, you know,
I
and
love
things
that.
like that. So
Yeah,
uh,
that's the way to do it. Yeah.
okay, we'll get to the your last chapter, which is leaving a legacy. And I did enjoy that, because you know, I'm at that stage where it is over for me. And part of, you know, the reason we started my homeschool is so that we could, to some extent, leave a legacy for the next
Yes.
generation
Yeah.
to help them in it. What are your, you know, what's that chapter, leaving a legacy, about, do you think?
Yeah, it's very much about we are the ones to continue her work. And so she, I talk about her leaving a legacy, and I write this some stories and illustrations about how I believe she did that and what a great job of that she did, even though she said she didn't want her name to be remembered. She just wanted the work. And unfortunately, she got both.
Yeah.
Fortunately for us. But how she left a legacy for us, and almost like a torch for us to carry, for something for us to take up. And so what I love about this is that the legacy looks like us. It looks like every individual family who express her ideas in such wonderful, unique ways all over the world, and that we have a continued opportunity to spread the word and to pass on the beauty of a Charlotte Mason education with our children, with our, with our communities. And so I love that. I love that it doesn't stop with us. It didn't stop with her. And that actually there was something so beautiful and powerful in her ideas that, here we are, 21st century mothers talking about it 100 years after her death. We're still saying, wasn't this great? Isn't this beautiful?
Yeah.
So that whole chapter is really about we are the ones to keep running and continue the work. And it will look so different to each family, to each child. And there's no perfect formula for what this will look like. But we just have to keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going with it. Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Leah, for coming and sharing about your book. Now, I know you can just get it on Book Depository, Amazon, and lots of places.
So how is it more readily available in Australia now?
Yeah. You can get it at lots of the places now.
Okay, that's good.
So yeah. And obviously, if you want to listen to the audiobook, you can listen to it read by you. So I don't encourage people to read Charlotte's works start as their first entry level into Charlotte Mason, only because I think there's 6 volumes and you can get bogged down, and there is stuff in there that is very culturally doesn't suit today. I remember reading in home education all this stuff about like food and doors when you open your windows and things like that, and I was like, oh, you're kidding. Like, this is so ridiculous. So and advice for the governess, and so it's the sort of book that you would read once you kind of understand her methods, and you can sort of put your filters up a little bit for what's culturally different. But I think this book is a great introduction to Charlotte Mason, and I love all the little Mason moments at the end to do it. And so I wish you great success with your book.
Thank you.
And I hope that we can chat again another time.
I hope so too. And I have to say, if people are interested, that Karen Glass has written volume 1 and volume 6 as kind of an updated modern version. I don't know if you've seen those. Volume 1 has just come out.
I have.
She's taken all those cultural references out. And so, if people do want to engage with Charlotte's work without all that, brilliant way of doing it. Yes. But I still think if you're just looking to sort of get your head around it just quickly and just see,
is this for me? I think starting off with an introductory book is a great idea, because I loved reading her volumes. Once I understood her methods, there was like so many underlines, and I was getting so much out of it, but it was because I already had a bit of a backbone there and had been doing it for a while, so I sort of really got it. All right, well, thanks very much, and we'll talk again soon, I hope.
Thank you so much for having me.